It's time for Cookies and Crime listener stories. This is a gift I once had by Anonymous. Anonymous says, throughout my whole life, I've been able to do things that I have no explanation for. My dad tells me it's just luck. My mom says it's a gift from God, but I'm not totally sure what it is. I would be able to tell when people's birthdays were without having to ask. I would guess their grandparents' names, things like that. However, it got weirder when I turned 11. Then I began to see weird shadows of the dead. They were figures that texturally resembled what it looks like when you move your hand underwater and the water shifts. Just vague outlines of people in rooms. One day in class, I asked a kid, "Did you recently lose someone in your life?" He responded, "Yes." I asked again. He was tall, right, with curly hair? A puzzled look came across his face and he replied, "Yes." I asked him a question once again. "And his death had something to do with trees, didn't it?" He began to cry and responded, "Yes, he fell out of a tree a few months ago and broke his neck. How did you know?" And I went silent. I wasn't totally sure how I knew. There was just a figure standing behind him and I could see his death and hear his voice. Then I turned to my teacher. "You had a tabby cat as a child, didn't you?" She said, "Yeah, how did you know that?" And I explained, "There's a small energy next to you. It's cat-shaped and sitting on your desk." That was the last time I was able to do it, but now I can feel when someone in my family is going to die. I get this feeling in my gut. The most surprising moment of this was when my dog passed. His death was out of the blue and there was no predicting it, but for weeks before, I knew it was going to happen. I would spend extra time with him, take him on walks more frequently, and every day when I got home, I would sit next to him for half an hour, petting him and telling him what a good boy he was and how much I loved him. I just had this feeling he was coming to the end of the line. Then, one day, things felt off. A friend wanted to hang out and go on a hike, so I agreed. Halfway through the hike, I got this weird feeling of I need to go home. And when I got home, my dog was bleeding from his mouth and lethargic. My parents were sitting with him discussing what to do when I walked in the door. That night, we had to put him down. His death came out of nowhere. There still isn't any explanation for why he died. I am so sorry about your dog, but I'm so glad that you got to spend extra time with him before he went. And thank you for sharing your story. It's time for Cookies and Crime. This is the story of Shasta Groney. Shasta lived in a neighborhood near Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, with her mom, Brenda Groney, her mom's boyfriend, Mark McKenzie, and her two older siblings, 13-year-old Slade and 9-year-old Dylan. She was 8 at the time. On May 15, 2005, Slade had been hired by a neighbor to mow the grass by his driveway earlier that day. The neighbor didn't have enough money to pay Slade, but promised him that he would stop by his house tomorrow to pay the money. When the neighbor arrived the next day to the Groney home, he found no one was there, but the dog was still inside barking incessantly, and the family cars were still parked in the driveway with doors opened. Out of suspicion, he called 911. The scene inside would change this small town forever. The bodies of Brenda, Slade, and Mark were found inside, bludgeoned to death. The two youngest kids, Dylan and Shasta, were missing. These horrible acts were done by Joseph Duncan, a serial killer and child harmer. Duncan, who had a lengthy criminal record and a warrant out for his arrest at the time, was stalking the family. He was particularly interested in Dylan and Shasta. On the night of May 16th, Shasta was woken up by her mother, who said someone was in the house. They went into the living room where she saw Duncan wearing black gloves and holding a gun. He tied her mother's hands with nylon zip ties and did the same to her mother's fiancé and her brother Slade. Then Shasta and Dylan were removed from the house. While she waited with her brother, she heard multiple thumping sounds coming from inside the home. She had no idea what was happening. Shasta and Dylan were taken to other locations where they were repeatedly assaulted and tortured for 6 weeks. Duncan eventually told her that he had beaten her family members to death with a hammer. Dylan would later be killed. Duncan insisted that Dylan's death was an accident. Apparently, when Duncan was digging for a beer in a plastic box, a shotgun that was also inside the box went off, hitting Dylan in the stomach. Shasta then saw Duncan finish Dylan off. Immediately after killing Dylan, Duncan started crying and told her that he only killed him to put him out of his misery. Shasta also reported that Duncan nearly killed her days after killing Dylan. He gave her the choice to be killed either by strangulation or with a gun. Shasta chose strangulation, and Duncan proceeded to wrap a rope around her neck and pull it tight. However, Shasta begged Duncan to stop, and he immediately did. He then asked her if she would like to meet his mother, which she responded yes. The two drove back towards Coeur d'Alene and stopped at Denny's. At this point, an Amber Alert was already rung out, and authorities were trying to find the missing children. On July 2, 2005, 48 days after the case began, Duncan and Shasta were discovered at that Denny's. One of the men recognized Shasta from a billboard that he passed earlier that evening and alerted his girlfriend and several employees. 2 days after Shasta's rescues, officials announced that Dylan's remains were found off of a remote Forest Service road in the Bitterroot Mountains. Duncan's arrest for this horrendous crime also linked him to other unsolved murders. Shasta was the sole survivor in her family, and Duncan died in prison last year from brain cancer.
Let's talk about what happened to 15-year-old Sierra Lamar. Sierra was born on October 19, 1996 and was from Fremont, California. She's described as having a goofy sense of humor, playful personality, and just always wanted to make people laugh. She was a cheerleader in high school and had a very big social life. After her parents' divorce, she moved from Fremont to Morgan Hill, California. Sierra was upset about this. She really loved her life in Fremont, she loved her friends, but her mom wanted a fresh start. On March 16, 2012, Sierra got up at around 6 o'clock in the morning and started getting ready for school. She would normally leave her house at around 7:15 and would walk a few blocks to the bus stop to make it there before 7:30. There was a lot of empty land around her house, which made her bus stop unofficial. It was an unmarked spot that only Sierra would be picked up at. So at around 7 a.m., Sierra posted this quick selfie on her social media, said goodbye to her mother Marlene, and headed to the bus stop. Throughout the day, Sierra's mother sent her a couple of text messages reminding her to clean the bathtub and to take the school bus home. However, Marlene never got a response back, but she just assumed that Sierra was busy at school. Later that afternoon, Marlene got off work at around 3:45 p.m. and called Sierra just to check in once again. Sierra was still not responding to any of her text messages or her phone calls. Marlene started to get worried, so she headed home to see if Sierra had made it home from school. However, when she got home, Sierra was not there. She ended up going to Sierra's high school to search for her there, and that's when the teachers told her that Sierra never made it to class. It's crazy that the school didn't notify Marlene earlier that her daughter had never made it to school. Marlene says that if they had notified her, she would have left work early to search for her daughter. After this, Marlene called 911 and reported her daughter as missing. Police checked the footage from the school bus that morning just to see if Sierra did get on the bus, but she never did. That means somewhere between 7:15 when Sierra left her home and 7:30 when the bus arrived, something happened to Sierra. Now police are thinking that maybe someone has been watching Sierra and they know that she's the only person that ever goes to this bus stop. They start looking at the footage from previous days on the bus to see if anything stands out, but nothing does. The following day, on March 17th, search and rescue units find Sierra's cell phone just a few blocks east of where the bus stop is. Police check her cell phone to see if they can find any clues, but they found nothing. The next day, search and rescue begins searching around a shed just a few miles away from Sierra's home. While searching around the shed, they find Sierra's black Juicy Couture bag tucked between the shed and a cactus. Inside the bag, they find a couple of items. They found Sierra's jeans, her shoes, and the sweatshirt she was wearing in the selfie she posted earlier that day. They did find some dirt and debris on her clothing, which indicated to police that she might have been dragged. Police take in all the items found in the bag and begin testing it for DNA. They find DNA that belonged to then 21-year-old Antolin Garcia Torres. This DNA was already in the system due to a prior arrest for a 2009 felony assault charge. Now, Antolin only lived about 7 miles away from Sierra. He lived in this trailer that he shared with his mother, his wife, and their young daughter. Okay, part 2 is up now. This is part 2 on what happened to 15-year-old Sierra Lamar. Now that police have Antolin's DNA on Sierra's belongings, they begin to have a 24-hour surveillance on him just to see if he was holding Sierra captive and could lead them to her. Along with this, police were able to obtain security video that captured Antolin leaving the trailer park where he lived 15 minutes before Sierra would have left to the bus stop. And the next 6 hours after he leaves are completely unaccounted for. Police bring in Antolin for questioning and they ask him about those 6 hours, and he says he went on a solo fishing trip. Now, there's no witnesses or anything to verify this fishing trip. Then police ask him how his DNA landed on Sierra's belongings, and this is how he explains it. He says that he sometimes pleasures himself in the car and then grabs a tissue to help clean him up. Then he says he sometimes throws the tissue out the window, so maybe this tissue landed on Sierra's belongings and that's how his DNA was on them. I mean, really, your tissue with your DNA just happened to land on the belongings of a missing 15-year-old girl? Like what? Obviously, police aren't buying this, but they continue to ask him what he did for the rest of the day. Antolin says that after he went fishing, he went to the bank to cash in a check, and there is footage of him at this bank to confirm. Police look at the footage and they notice that the bottom of his jeans looks a little bit different. They believe that his jeans are either wet or they were covered in dirt. Witnesses say that the morning Sierra disappeared, they saw a red VW Jetta driving around near Sierra's home, which is the exact same car that Antolin drives. Police search his car and they find some of Sierra's hair wrapped around a rope in his trunk. They also found Sierra's DNA on the rear door handle and on the armrest. With this, police were able to confirm that at one point, Sierra was in fact in Antolin's car, despite him claiming that he does not know her. So then, on May 21st, 2012, 2 months after Sierra was last seen, police finally arrested Antolin. He was charged with the kidnapping and murder of 15-year-old Sierra Lamar. He pleaded not guilty and his trial did not begin until January of 2017. The prosecution revealed that in 2009, Antolin attempted to kidnap 3 separate females in the parking lots of 2 Safeway stores in Morgan Hill. They believe that these attempted kidnappings were sort of a practice run for the abduction of Sierra. So then, on May 9, 2017, the jury found Antolin guilty. Since they have still not found Sierra's body, they gave him life in prison without the possibility of parole. At the trial, Antolin's own mother testified, saying that her son was innocent and was at the wrong place at the wrong time. Sierra's family also spoke at the trial, and they say that they're happy with what the jurors did and that it does give them peace as a family to know that he won't be able to do this to another child. This guy is literally a father and has a daughter of his own and did this to someone else's daughter. To this day, Sierra's body has never been found. If you know anything about the whereabouts of Sierra, please contact the Santa Clara County Sheriff's Office or their anonymous tip line. It's not right that after so many years, Sierra's family still does not know where she is and cannot lay her to rest properly. I truly hope that Sierra is found soon and gets the justice that she deserves. Let's talk about what happened to 8-year-old Sandra Cantu. Sandra was born on March 8, 2001. She lived in Tracy, California with her mother, her grandparents, and her 3 siblings. She lived at the Orchard Estates mobile home park, and everyone in this community was very friendly. Sandra had a lot of friends in this neighborhood, and one of her closest friends lived only a couple of houses down. She was a 5-year-old little girl, and her great-grandpa was a pastor at the local church, so Sandra's mom never really had to worry about who she was hanging out with. On Friday, March 27, 2009, Sandra came home from school and decided to go play at a friend's house for a bit before dinner. When time went by and Sandra came back home, she checked in with her mom and told her she was going to go back out to keep playing. A couple of hours went by since Sandra was last seen, but Maria wasn't too worried. Like I said, she knew all of Sandra's friends, she trusted the community, and she knew Sandra would be back before dinner time. However, when dinner time rolled around at 7 p.m., Sandra had still not come home. This is when Maria decided to call the Tracy Police Department and report her daughter as missing. She was last seen wearing a pink Hello Kitty shirt, black leggings, and Hannah Montana flip-flops. Police start canvassing the area and they ask the neighbors if they've seen Sandra or noticed anything suspicious, and one of them did. One of the neighbors, named Melissa Huckabee, who was actually the mother of Sandra's 5-year-old friend, texted Maria earlier that day and told her, "Tell the police I had something stolen at around 4 p.m. I don't know if that makes a difference or not." Now a little girl was missing and someone's suitcase had been stolen from their driveway. So police hear all this information and they believe that Sandra was most likely abducted. Police discover that the Cantu family does have surveillance cameras outside of their house pointing to the front yard. They check the surveillance camera and they spot Sandra. You can see Sandra leaving her friend's house and running and skipping back home. Just as she is about to get home, something to the right of her catches her attention and distracts her. Instead of continuing straight home, Sandra goes in the opposite direction. So police begin to compile a list of suspects, and at the top of the list is Sandra's father, Daniel. Daniel and Maria were going through a pretty rough divorce, so they thought this might be motive for him to abduct his daughter. However, they checked his alibi, they cleared him, and he was no longer a suspect. Police then talked to an ice cream man that people had seen around the neighborhood talking to children, and they also cleared him as a suspect. Then they spoke to a man that 2 years before Sandra's disappearance had kissed her on the lips in front of her family. I mean, what? This man kissed a little girl on the lips and nothing happened to him? I don't understand, but police spoke to him. He admitted that he was attracted to younger girls and that he playfully kissed Sandra on the lips. Police spoke to him and they ruled him out as a suspect. It wasn't until a candlelight vigil was held for Sandra when police received new information. Part 2 is up now. This is part 2 on what happened to 8-year-old Sandra Cantu. So at Sandra's vigil, Melissa, the neighbor that I mentioned earlier, comes up to police all distraught and she's freaking out. She said she found this note that said, "Cantu locked in stolen suitcase, thrown in water on Bachetti Road and Whitehall Road. Witness." That's all it said. So police see this letter and they think it's strange. They don't understand why there's so many spelling errors and why did Melissa get this note. It was just very strange, and the fact that Melissa had told police that her suitcase had been stolen, they just thought it was weird, so they brought her in for questioning. A little bit of background on Melissa: she's a single mother to a 5-year-old girl that's really good friends with Sandra. Her grandpa was a pastor at the local church, and she was actually a Sunday teacher there. Now, she says the day Sandra disappeared, she was at the church decorating her classroom. Then she said she made a phone call at 4 p.m. to report her stolen suitcase. Police check her phone records and they confirm that she did make this phone call, but just because she made the phone call doesn't mean she wasn't involved. They obtain a search warrant to search Melissa's car, and inside they find a post-it note. On the post-it note were written words that had been scribbled out. When they sent this note in for testing, they determined that the words were Bachetti Road, Whitehall Road, and water. All the same words that were written on the note that Melissa had found and turned into police. Underneath her dresser, they found a notepad that had the same type of paper that was used for the note. When police found all these items, they determined that Melissa was the one that wrote the note, sent it to herself, and used it to insert herself into the investigation. But why would she do this? Well, before police could answer this, they received a phone call on April 6, 2009. This phone call came from a man named Jose Luis Franco that was an employee at an irrigation pond. He says he was draining the pond when he noticed a black suitcase. When they opened up the suitcase, inside was 8-year-old Sandra Cantu. She was still wearing the same clothes she had on the day she disappeared. I won't go into too many details about how she passed away because it is very brutal, but I will say she was essayed, she was drugged, and her cause of death was asphyxiation. A witness came forward and they placed Melissa at the pond the day Sandra disappeared. After this, police went to her classroom to search and they found a white string that had been cut and retied. This same string had been used to tie the suitcase. Then they found a rolling pin that had blood on it, which they believe this rolling pin was used to essay Sandra. Police confronted Melissa and she basically broke down and said it was all an accident. She said that Sandra had been playing at her house with her daughter, they were playing hide and seek, and Sandra decided to hide in the suitcase. Somehow Melissa forgot that Sandra was in the suitcase, so she packed it up, put it in her car, and drove to the church. When she got to the church, she unloaded the suitcase because she thought her school supplies was there, but when she opened it, she saw Sandra inside. She tried to give Sandra CPR, she even put a wet towel on her head, but Sandra was gone. Now, police don't really believe this is what happened, especially because the DNA came back from the rolling pin and the blood on it was Sandra's. Melissa had also previously been searching on how to kill a child, so they think that this was premeditated. Melissa was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole.